Everyone's had that sense of dread at least once in their life when getting onto an airplane, right? The many different ways that things could go wrong just staring you in the face. Yet even still, millions of us do it each and every year. It's almost like they haven't seen a certain 2000s horror film where it shows just how wrong air travel can go. So join us as we take a look at what happened to Final Destination.
In death, there are no accidents, no coincidences, no mishaps, and no escapes.
In the 90s, James Wong and Glenn Morgan were mostly known as X-Files writers. They'd had several successful episodes of the series, but were hoping to break out into more of their own work. Young screenwriter Jeffrey Reddick was also hoping to break into the industry, and was told to write a spec script for a popular TV show, and X-Files it was. Reddick had been inspired by the story of a woman being told to switch her flight due to her mother's bad feeling, only for the original flight to crash. This set Reddick's imagination on fire and resulted in a fun spec script. Unfortunately, the script never made it to the offices of the X-Files, but a friend of Reddick's told him to expand the story into a full-length feature. This script would eventually become Final Destination. But it doesn't end there. New Line Cinema bought the script and had Reddick do another draft. The studio liked the story enough to send it out to various directors to see if any connected with the material. The script came across Wong and Morgan's desk, and they were very interested. However, they wanted to do a full rewrite and direct the feature themselves.
This is a message or something, Claire. Or someone hinting at a design.
The characters began as young adults, but with the success of movies like Scream, the studio wanted a full-blown teen cast. Teen for Hollywood, that is. So they looked to popular actors at the time that could pull off the high school look. Originally written as Fat Teenager, Sean William Scott took on the role of Billy Hitchcock. This would see him in a much nerdier facade than he was known for from his massive role as Steven Stifler in American Pie. Ali Larter was fresh off of the success of Varsity Blues and took on a role considerably different from the one that she had there. But she pulls off the quiet, weird girl quite well. Glenn Morgan also cast his wife Kristen Cloak as the teacher, Mrs. Luton. Finally, the role of Alex Browning was cast with Devon Sawa. With Alex being such an important character to the story, he took the longest for the filmmakers to find. In fact, it wasn't even Sawa's audition that impressed them. Instead, it was his performance in the film Idle Hands. After viewing the movie, Sawa had the job in the bag. Live casts were done for nearly all of the main actors. And you'll notice some familiarity when it comes to some of the characters' names. Billy Hitchcock is named after famed horror director Alfred Hitchcock. Terry Chaney was a reference to Lon Chaney. Agent Schreck was named for Max Schreck, who famously played Nosferatu. Even the lead, Alex Browning, was named for horror director Todd Browning, with his best friend taking on the name Todd. Just take a look at the character list and you'll see plenty of Easter eggs. What exactly is Final Destination about? Well, a high school French class is going to Paris for their class trip, but Alex Browning has a premonition that the plane is going to crash. While he's able to save several people, the crash still happens. And we soon learn that you can't escape death, as it comes after those who got off the flight and kills them in increasingly horrific ways. Filming took place mostly on Vancouver Island in Canada, with the Vancouver International Airport standing in for JFK. Funnily enough, they even had to shoot this scene from this angle, because if you turn the camera, there was a massive Canadian flag that the airport refused to take down. The production went anything but smoothly, with many cast members filming other projects during the same time. Kerr Smith was a regular on Dawson's Creek, and Devon Sawa had a role in the Bill Pullman movie The Guilty. So getting all cast members in one place, especially for scenes where they all had to be together, proved rather difficult. Music is quite important to the film, with John Denver's Rocky Mountain High getting highlighted. For those unaware, John Denver died in a plane crash, adding a certain evil undertone to a seemingly innocent song. And despite being relatively low budget, the film actually has a full orchestral score. Shirley Walker does a wonderful job with it and really soaks the film in dread. And it's not just the music that contributes to this, it's the entire set design. Production designer John Willett did something that he called skewing a set, which would cause an audience to feel a sense of unease just by looking at something. He would do this by putting colors next to each other that were psychologically displeasing, as well as doing forced perspective shots. Just watch as these guys are almost hitting the ceiling. It all adds up to an atmosphere absolutely teeming with dread. At the time, New Line made a point to test screen all of their films. Bob Shaye felt that if they were going to be spending millions upon millions of dollars to promote a movie, they needed to make sure that audiences were buying what they're selling. So Final Destination went through a series of test screenings that would completely change the ending of the film. And as was the case with most test screenings, the film was filled with unfinished effects and a temporary score. The original ending of the film had Alex Browning sacrifice himself in order to save Clear from the car. He's electrocuted and dies a pretty painful death. Clear is saved and several months later is seen having a baby. See, there was a deleted scene earlier in the movie where Alex and Clear hook up, and then Clear finds out that she's pregnant. However, they felt that the audience immediately retract when finding out about Clear's pregnancy, and there was a weird vibe that followed the entire third act. Which is really too bad, as the original ending is really awesome, and we even get a nice scene between Clear and Carter. But Alex's death destroyed the mood of the film and completely lost audiences. So they went back and changed it. Instead, Alex, Clear, and Carter have conquered their fear of flying and made it to Paris to celebrate, well, living. There we see that their plan to escape death didn't quite work out so well, and Carter unfortunately gets the brunt of it. Final Destination released in the United States on March 17, 2000, and brought in over $10 million on its opening weekend. The film would end its box office run at $112 million worldwide. Despite its high marks in the horror world, critics did not like the Death Has a Vendetta film, receiving a 35% rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes. The critical consensus was that, despite a panel of X-Files alums at the helm and a promising premise, flighty performances and poor execution keep Final Destination from ever taking off. Fortunately for all of us though, audiences felt different, and the series absolutely exploded in popularity. We've already covered its 2 sequels on our series, so be sure to check those out if you want to see exactly where the series ended up going. Unfortunately, despite surviving the first film, Devon Sawa is missing from all of these sequels, though we do get a return of Clear Rivers. We'd soon come to realize that this isn't a series that likes to bring back its characters, and with good reason.
I knew it would rip. That's how I saved him. Just like the plane, just like the explosion, I saw it.
Whether it's one of the many deaths, or the terrifying plane crash at the film's forefront, there are plenty of scenes that will stick with you when the credits roll on Final Destination. And the brilliance of the film is that, whatever that may be, it's a moment that will come back to you over and over again, because this isn't some mad psychopath who wants to kill his sister with a butcher knife. This is death, and death comes for us all.
I will not let this plane crash be the most important thing in my life! I'm moving on, Carter. And if you want to waste your life beating the shit out of Alex every time you see him, then you can just drop fucking dead.
believe that it's been 20 years since this highway accident? I don't know about you, but I can still feel it in my bones whenever getting onto a freeway. And driving behind a logging truck? Forget about it. But there's so much more to this movie than just a phenomenal car crash at its forefront. There's the entertaining characters like Rory, who absolutely steals the show.
And if I die, would you throw down my drugs and my paraphernalia, my porno?
And the ones that you want to slap, like lottery winner Evan Lewis. Whatever it is, it culminates in one awesome ride. No pun intended. So today, we're going to tell you what the f happened to Final Destination 2. The first Final Destination was a relative hit when it released in 2000. The plane crash was a thing of nightmares and came to us from James Wong, Glenn Morgan, and Jeffrey Reddick. Originally planned as an X-Files episode, this Death Has a Vendetta film showed a litany of possibilities for any sequel. I mean, hell, death can come for you in so many ways. But unfortunately, James Wong and Glenn Morgan were unable to return as they had already signed on to the Jet Li action film The One. So instead, Jeffrey Reddick set out to come up with a story idea for the sequel. Despite only having directed Homeward Bound 2: Lost in San Francisco, David R. Ellis was hired as a director. Having worked as a second unit director for decades, Ellis has more of an action flair than one for horror. Because of this, the movie has a little more kinetic energy than the original, and feels considerably more like popcorn fun. J. Mackie Gruber and Eric Bress were brought in to write a script that they'd conceived with Reddick. In one of the more controversial moments of the entire franchise, the writers make the decision to kill off Devon Sawa's Alex Browning character from the first film. In and of itself, this isn't a terrible thing, as it's happened in horror movies before. But the biggest sin committed here is that Alex is killed off-screen. So after spending an entire film following this kid as he narrowly escapes death, we don't even get to see when he's finally offed. Rumors swirled for years that Sawa didn't return due to a contract dispute with the studio, and that they were lowballing him to return. However, series producer Craig Perry has denied this, saying that it was done for narrative reasons. Maybe it's somewhere in the middle. The writers did, however, bring back Ali Larter's Clear Rivers character, placing her in a mental institution, where she's hiding away from death. Given the arc her character goes on in the first film, this feels like a bit of a step back for her. For the lead, they decided to go the final girl route and cast AJ Cook as Kimberly Corman. Cook was relatively unknown at the time, but you may recognize her nowadays because she's been on that CBS show Criminal Minds for over 300 episodes. So I think she's doing pretty well for herself. Funnily enough, Cook is actually a natural blonde. Worried that audiences would have trouble distinguishing between the two blondes on screen, Cook was asked to dye her hair brown. Ah, the early 2000s. A time where you couldn't have two blondes in your movie out of fear of confusion. Good times. And it's even funnier when you realize that Ali Larter's character was already brown-haired in the first film. Just keep her as a brown-haired girl.
This girl is really freaked out. In fact, all of them are scared, as you can imagine.
Scared? These people are the luckiest sons of bitches on the planet.
Michael Landis, Terrence C. Carson, Keegan Connor Tracy, and Jonathan Cherry round out the rest of the cast of survivors. Finally, Tony Todd returned to his role as the ominous morgue technician. The story was a simple one. Kimberly and her friends are off on a weekend getaway, but she has a vision of a gnarly car crash. She's thankfully able to stop it and save several people, but unfortunately her friends aren't so lucky. Convinced that death will come for them, they all team up to try and stop it. Thankfully, they have the events of the previous film to help convince the characters quickly that yes, this is really happening. It's pretty by the numbers, but the characters are really fun, and they introduce a whole concept of death trying to rectify some past mistakes. See, each of these people were present during events in the first film, and had their own little mini avoiding death moment.
It didn't just change our lives. It affected everyone and everything we've come into contact with since.
So death is trying to make up for it. Yeah, don't think too hard on the logistics for this one, because then you're going to be questioning, how was death able to get all of these people on this on-ramp? But again, you don't want to think too hard on this. With a budget of $26 million, filming for Final Destination 2 took place on Vancouver Island and surrounding areas. So if there's times that you think this looks like a CW show, that's why. The notorious highway scene was filmed on the British Columbia Highway 19, where they shut down sections for filming. Surprisingly, most of the elements in the crash are practical. While there are CGI enhancements, mostly with fire, the crashes are all very real, which is why it's so impactful 20 years later. In fact, one of the largest elements of CGI in this crash were the logs falling off the truck, as the production learned quite quickly that real logs only bounce about an inch off the ground even when they're dropped from large heights. So CGI was really the only way to do it. Even getting away from the opening highway scene, the deaths in Final Destination 2 are some of the best of the entire series. From the entire apartment fire sequence to this domino effect after the accident, there's so many that will stick with you long after the credits roll. Life casts were done on all of the actors, which allows for many practical moments that likely would have just been entirely CGI these days. Even the scene with Tim getting completely smashed by a pane of glass was done practically. And to think, this character was originally going to be just 9 years old. Thankfully, New Line execs pushed back on the idea of such a small child being harmed so brutally. Seems like a good idea, because the death is disturbing enough as it is. One of the film's bigger stunts involved Cook and Landis being submerged underwater while in an ambulance. The actors actually performed the stunt themselves, with Cook having to overcome an intense fear of being trapped underwater. They made it through though, and the scene went off without a hitch. There's also a pretty funny ending tag where it's revealed that Brian Gibbons, the boy that Rory saved from getting hit by the truck earlier, is now on Death's list, and Death needs to do a little bit of cleanup. And fans of Shameless may recognize little Brian.
It was like I was there. I knew something bad was gonna happen even before it did. It just felt wrong, just like...
Just like what?
You guys all heard about Flight 180, right? The kid who got off the plane. What happened a year ago today?
Final Destination 2 released in the United States on January 31st, 2003, and earned over $16 million on its opening weekend. The film ended its worldwide tally at over $90 million. While this would be the lowest total of the entire franchise, this was still a massive hit. Like many horror films, critics weren't quite a fan, earning a 48% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. The consensus was that this sequel is little more than an excuse to stage elaborate, gory scenes of characters getting killed off. Yes, you are right, critics, and they are glorious. The franchise was healthy enough to spawn 3 more sequels, with a 6th film announced from Jeffrey Reddick. Whether that follows the more subdued approach of the original, or the more bombastic approach that Ellis took with the first sequel, audiences are clearly chomping at the bit for more entries. Any good movie will leave an impression on you, and spring up in moments that you wouldn't expect it to. But with Final Destination 2, anytime I get on a highway, I know that the visual image of the crash is going to enter my head, and I'm going to be hoping like hell for no log trucks.
Death. It comes for us all. But the Final Destination franchise has somehow found a way to make death not only imminent, but a rabid hunter on a path of destruction. Because if you ever avoid a massive disaster because of some creepy vision, then you better prepare yourself for a bad time, because death is coming for you. Premonitions will only save you for so long, so join us as we cover the third entry in the death-defying series and tell you what the f*** happened to Final Destination 3.
So let me get this straight. I'm gonna OD on nail polish. Ian is gonna be embarrassed to death.
Original writers and director James Wong and Glenn Morgan marked their return to the franchise after the very successful second outing from David Ellis. Wong and Morgan had always envisioned the series as one that would follow different groups every film, since, death can come for anyone. They also felt that part of the fun was seeing the characters figure out that death was coming for them, and following the same people would rob the audience of that. So a fresh new group of characters was decided upon. But what about the accident? The accident at the front and center of a Final Destination movie is a big set piece for the film. After the plane crash in the first and the absolutely life-changing highway crash in the second, the filmmakers knew they needed something big for the third outing. Thankfully, the studio, New Line, suggested that they do a roller coaster derailment. It made so much sense. It's easy to think of what could go wrong whenever going onto a roller coaster, and that fear is practically universal. So Wong and Morgan got to scripting.
A kid had a vision that the plane was going to explode, just like you did. He freaked out, and 7 people got off the plane, just like us.
What exactly is the story of Final Destination 3? Well, Wendy and her classmates are visiting an amusement park to celebrate their graduation from high school. But when Wendy has a premonition that the Devil's Flight roller coaster is going to crash, she begs to get off the ride. When she does, along with some of her other classmates, they are able to avoid death, and the coaster does end up crashing. What follows are exceedingly graphic ways in which death comes after these kids. See, death is coming for them in the same order that they died in the premonition, so they eventually think they've beaten it when they avoid death a second time. Only we all know how that goes. Wendy gets another premonition, this time while on a subway car, and this is one that she can't escape from. When it came to casting, Wong originally wanted a completely unknown group. However, once production ramped up, the studio asked for some marketable faces. Wong was most focused on the roles of Wendy and Kevin, feeling that they were the most vital to the story. Wendy was originally intended to be a perky blonde, but after Mary Elizabeth Winstead auditioned for the role and impressed with her range, they rewrote the role for her. Not a surprise given that they literally time a shot based on when a tear falls from her eye. It's amazing. Merriman won the role the moment he auditioned, with Wong feeling he was just the right guy to play Kevin. The character could easily be seen as an asshole since he's kind of moving in on Wendy after the incident, but Merriman pulls it off and doesn't make it feel creepy. Chris Lemke, who starred as Ian McKinley, actually had to learn how to drive a fork truck for his role. While this may seem like a simple task, forklifts don't exactly drive like a simple vehicle, and he had to maneuver it around very tight spaces, all while delivering lines of dialogue. The rest of the cast was rounded out with Texas Battle, Gina Holden, Amanda Crew, Crystal Lowe, Shalon Simmons, Alex Johnson, and Sam Easton. There was also a very brief cameo from a pre-Glee Corey Monteith during the festival at the end. While Tony Todd didn't return in a physical role, this time we do get him as the voice of the devil statue, as well as the subway conductor at the end.
I'm not gonna die! It's you, Wendy! You're dead!
Mostly shot at night in Vancouver, Canada, and with 2 units running at the same time, this resulted in a very hectic shooting schedule. Sometimes the paint would be drying on one set just before they were supposed to be filming on it. Or take the first day of filming, for example, which was changed from the roller coaster to an outdoor shot due to the rain, only for it to not rain at all when they were filming the scene. The production was rife with obstacles to overcome, even the monotonous kind. Take for example the shot of a falling hammer, which second unit had to shoot dozens of times before they got it right. That's Hollywood, baby. The roller coaster scenes were filmed over a 2-week period on the corkscrew roller coaster at Vancouver's Playland. Using a combination of CGI, mirrored shots, and running the cast through the ride dozens of times, they were able to transform the coaster into the much larger Devil's Flight coaster in the film. While the pre-accident footage was able to be shot on the ride itself, as soon as the ride starts falling apart, the scene is entirely green screened. The finished sequence consists of 144 visual effects shots. The crash is often criticized for being just too CGI looking. When it comes to a Final Destination film, few things are more important than the deaths. And Final Destination 3 has some damn good ones. The first two post-coaster crash deaths are of Ashley and Ashlyn, the dumb preppy girls. They get fried in a tanning salon. Since the scene required nudity, the set was completely closed off during filming. For the fire effects, a stunt woman was covered in a special fire retardant gel and was able to be set on fire for approximately 26 seconds. Next was the death of Frankie Cheeks, which required a full head cast of actor Sam Easton. Shot in 3 plates, one with the engine, one with the actor, and then one with the dummy head. They were combined for a fantastic end result. Oh, and anytime you see the chunks of brain and skull flying at the actors, know that it's just a simple combination of mashed up strawberries and bananas. Delicious. Next, for the death of Luis Ramiro, notice the last name, the production had to build custom weightlifting equipment for the gag, since they needed it to pop Luis's head like a balloon. And you know, most manufacturers tried to avoid that in their gym spaces. They did a head cast on Texas Battle, and again took the combined plate approach, to great effect.
There is someone walking behind you.
Music continued to play a big role in the series, with the Vogue's Turn Around Look at Me being used to wonderful effect. Love Roller Coaster by Ohio Players also features significantly during the tanning bed death, in a bit of twisted irony.
People around the world, join hands.
Oddly enough, there's actually a cover of the song Love Train by Tommy Lee that plays over the end credits, but the song has never been physically released. Initially, the film ended right after Ian's death, with Wendy, Kevin, and her sister Julie all walking away unscathed. But test audiences didn't react kindly and felt they'd seen it all before. But you know what they hadn't seen before? Another accident, this time with the heroes unable to avoid it. So Morgan and Wong got to work coming up with another ending. But when writing the new Subway ending, they also decided to ramp up Ian's death. While he was originally crushed by the large equipment, his body wasn't shown. So they instead decided to make it considerably gorier. The end result, which we can't really show you here, is truly glorious. As for the subway scene itself, they built a miniature of the rail system and crashed it. It provides one of the bigger thrills of the series as the film begins and ends on a massive crash.
Oh shit. Again.
Final Destination 3 released in the United States on February 10th, 2006 and brought in nearly $20 million on its opening weekend. The film ended its worldwide run at $117 million, continuing the franchise's box office success. But fans of the franchise were mixed on this entry, thinking they were receiving more of the same. It received a 43% rotten rating at Rotten Tomatoes and was summed up as being gory and pointless. The home video release is actually one of the more impressive, featuring a full-blown 90-minute making-of featurette called Kill Shot: Making Final Destination 3. This is a day-to-day breakdown of the entire filming process and an absolute must for fans of the film, or just fans of film in general. There's also a documentary called Dead Teenager Movie, a term coined by late critic Roger Ebert, which breaks down the film with a more cultural impact approach. There's also a very fun Choose Your Fate mode, where you can watch the film and get several different choose your own adventure style choices. Seriously, if you like this movie, make sure you're checking out this release. The Final Destination series continued on with 2 more films, and another currently in development for HBO Max. While we've yet to get any concrete information on the new one, fans are already chomping at the bit for more in the series. Between all of the creative deaths and fun characters, I can't think of a modern series I'd want a resurgence of more, because there's nothing quite like getting on a roller coaster, and scenes from Final Destination 3 start entering your head.
I was meant to see this movie.
movie.
When it comes to the Final Destination series, nothing is more important than the opening disaster. I mean, come on, we all know that. But at some point, you start running out of disastrous events that can happen realistically. Airplane? Done that. Highway? Check. Roller coaster? Yep. Oh hey, what about a train? Oh yeah, that's been done too. Then I guess we can go to the next logical place. A racetrack? Okay, so maybe a little off the beaten path, but with the highway crash being so legendary, returning to the car flipping and engine exploding felt like a no-brainer for the franchise. But when the series gets discussed, there's often one film that is at the bottom of everyone's list. So let's look and see why that is and see what the f happened to the Final Destination.
I saw the whole thing, Arthur. There's gonna be a huge crash. Of course there's a crash. There's always a f***ing crash.
Final Destination 3 had originally been planned to be filmed in 3D. However, budgetary constraints prevented that from happening. But when production ramped up for Final Destination 4, Hollywood was deep into their obsession with 3D. And more importantly, they were seeing the results in their box office receipts. So the decision was made to shoot this sequel in 3D. Final Destination 2's writer Eric Bress submitted a script that had the studio very excited, and immediately greenlit the film. The film's opening accident would be set at a racetrack, inspired by the Circuit du Monde disaster, which killed 84 people in total. The rest of the movie follows the established structure of person who sees premonition goes around trying to convince others what's happening, while said survivors die around them. James Wong was originally on board to direct, but he eventually had to drop out due to scheduling conflicts with Dragon Ball Evolution. I'm thinking he's really regretting his choice there. Wanting to emulate the bombastic fun of the second film, the studio approached David R. Ellis about returning for this outing. Ellis was interested in the 3D element, so he immediately signed on.
I'm in your ear.
That's a lot of tampons for one woman.
With characters such as MILF and Mechanic, the Final Destination isn't exactly a wealth of riches when it comes to interesting characters, or even believable ones. We instead get a pretty bland cast made up of Bobby Campo, Nick Zano, Chantel Van Santen, Haley Webb, and Krista Allen. Fans of Forrest Gump will likely recognize Bubba himself, McKelty Williamson, as genuinely kind George. One person we would unfortunately not see return is Tony Todd, who had appeared as the morgue technician in the first two films, as well as the voice of the devil and rail conductor in 3. Todd had a scheduling conflict and was unable to appear, although he does make sure to make an appearance in 5. And if you're wondering why the movie is called The Final Destination and not just Final Destination 4, it's because the studio made the same mistake that Paramount did with Friday the 13th and what they themselves did with Nightmare on Elm Street. They thought it would be the final entry in the series and wanted to label it as such to help out the box office. Given that it would not be the final film, it just makes it even more confusing when talking about the film these days. While the rest of the series had been filmed in Vancouver, Canada, New Orleans had seen itself become a bustling film city with their very favorable tax credits. So Ellis convinced the studio to shoot the film there, which immediately gives it a bit of a different look from the others in the series. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing is up for you to decide. There was no proper speedway around in Louisiana though, so they had to go to the Mobile International Speedway in Alabama in order to film the opening car crash. The crash itself is a mixture of CGI and practical, though there's a ton more CGI than the highway crash in 2, especially when it comes to the deaths. Nearly everything here is enhanced in some way, and it makes the effects look rather cheesy. Especially when you add in the 3D effect, which often just makes things look strange. The deaths in The Final Destination are fast and unrelenting. Krista Allen's MILF gets her teeth taken out and then an engine block slammed into her chest. When she actually dies, there's a long drawn-out scene in a beauty salon where she ends up getting taken out by a rock to the eye.
I've got my eye on you two.
The behind the scenes shows the difficulty that the filmmakers went through to come up with such fun practical effects. It's an absolute mystery as to why they decided to ruin them with so much CGI on top of them. It's hard not to think of the Thing prequel, which released around the same time. Some of the deaths that are present are so over the top, they're hard to even be scared of. One of the great things about the first two films was that it put the characters in situations that you could see yourself in. It's impossible to be behind a log truck and not think about Final Destination 2. Here, it's just unrelatable event after unrelatable event. Just look at the mechanic who gets hit by compressed air into a fence which cuts him up. Who is scared of that happening to them in real life? Even one of the deaths that is most anticipated, given that it's douchebag Hunt who's going to get it, ultimately ends in a whimper. We mostly just get shots of him struggling underwater, only for there to be a bunch of blood and guts eventually coming out of the drain. So like many of the deaths here, it just feels very underwhelming. I'm not going to lie though, I still get a kick out of behind the scenes stuff like this, where they're essentially telling the extras how to die.
You're in pain. Got the crap kicked out of you. Here we go.
Oh, and make sure to keep an eye out for the Clear River shout out while Nick is out and about, even if it makes very little sense when you actually think about the fact that Clear is an actual person in this universe. As has been a trend when it comes to this franchise, when the studio took the film to test screenings, audiences were not happy with the ending. See, the original ending had Nick sacrificing himself in order to get the people out of the theater. Only once Laurie and Janet are out, a giant piece of equipment absolutely crushes them, with only one of their hands left over. Then there was another alternate ending that they tried where Nick gets sucked into the escalator that killed Laurie and dies. Funny enough, these reshoots were actually done at Universal Studios down in Florida. So if the ending looks like a theme park ride, you know why. Instead of either of these endings, they opted for what we got in the film, where they seemingly escape the theater chaos only to be hit by a truck while enjoying their coffee. Given that it's entirely CGI, it's hard not to be disappointed with the decision. Usually these reshoots were meant to ramp up the ending, not make it end like some kind of violent cartoon. The Final Destination would serve as the first film in the series not to be scored by Shirley Walker. Instead, Brian Tyler took over composing duties, and as such, the score is much more hard rock and bombastic than the films in the past. There's also a considerable amount of commercial music, with Shinedown's Devour getting ample placement during the race. The Final Destination released in the United States on August 28, 2009, and brought in $28.3 million on its opening weekend. The film would end its box office total at $187 million. This entry is commonly referred to as the worst in the franchise, and it's not too difficult to see why when you notice the reviews. With a 27% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, the critical consensus is that, with little of the ingenuity of previous installments, The Final Destination is predictable, disposable horror fare. Since it's a 3D movie, that also means that we got a 3D home video release. But I'll tell you right now, it's certainly no Avatar. Sadly, director David R. Ellis passed away in 2013 due to undisclosed reasons, which is really too bad as he had a very unique view of the franchise that would probably benefit the series during its extended hiatus. If there's one thing that his Final Destination films have, it's that they're a boatload of fun. And while The Final Destination may be the weakest entry in the franchise, it's still a fun time at the movies. The 3D gimmick just increases the absurdity of most of the situations and makes it a perfect film to half-watch with friends while mostly making fun of it. So long as you're getting some entertainment from the film, then it must be doing something right.
Have you all lost your f***ing mind?
The Final Destination series is in the midst of a near 13-year break, but thankfully that should be ending next year with the 6th entry in the series. But there was another time when the franchise seemed as good as dead. After the Final Destination came out, it seemed like it was the end of any cheating of death. But thankfully Eric Heiserer came along with a script that would blow audiences away. So we're getting into all of the gymnastics mishaps, terrible bridge construction, and massages with a not-so-happy ending as we look at what the f*** happened to Final Destination 5.
A lucky few survive the disaster, and then one by one, death comes for them all.
After the 4th entry in the series, Warner Brothers, having bought New Line Cinema in 2008, considered Final Destination to be donezo. At least they did for all of 1 year, because the head of New Line, Alan Horn, announced in 2010 that they were developing a film from one of the writers of the Nightmare on Elm Street remake, Eric Heiserer. I'm sure you're thinking, wait, how did he manage to book that job after making what is easily one of the worst remakes of all time? Well, his script here was killer, and sometimes that's all it takes. And I don't want to get into spoilers just yet, so we'll save the details of that for a little later. Steve Quayle was one of James Cameron's second unit directors on both Titanic and Avatar, so he was able to snag the directing gig. Not wanting to go for a typical naming approach, New Line Cinema announced that the film would be named Final Destination, which may just be the worst name in existence. Thankfully, they reversed their decision after some intense backlash. But what is Final Destination 5 even about? Well, we follow a paper company. Hey, they were really popular in this era apparently, as they're going on a company retreat. But then things get all Final Destination-y when the suspension bridge they use collapses, and Sam Lawton has a vision of it all. While he's able to save them, death eventually comes for everyone that escaped the bridge accident, and it is ruthless. Casting of the film happened very quickly, with Miles Fisher being the first announced cast member. You may remember him from the American Psycho parody music video, which is an absolute banger. For the lead, Nicholas DeGasto landed the part of Sam Lawton, and this is my opportunity to shout out Trial and Error, which is an amazing first season, and DeGasto is in the lead role. Please check it out. Then, having been one of Jason's victims in the Friday the 13th reboot, Arlen Escarpeta won a role. The cast was filled out with people like David Koechner, Emma Bell, Jacqueline McCannis Wood, Ellen Rowe, and PJ Byrne. Now that's one Canadian cast. Thankfully, after not appearing in the 4th entry, Tony Todd returned as William Bloodworth, morgue tech who knows a lot more than he's letting on. And the franchise got a bit of prestige with Courtney B. Vance taking on the role of FBI agent Jim Block. I always enjoyed this element of the Final Destination movies, so I was glad that they brought it back. They also continue the trend of naming characters after various horror movie filmmakers. Candace Hooper is named after Toby Hooper, Olivia Castle is named after William Castle, then Peter Friedkin is named for the late great William Friedkin. I'd say the names are a little more subtle than Chaney and Hitchcock. Unlike the prior entry, which had filmed in New Orleans, Final Destination 5 was filmed in its usual haunting grounds of Vancouver, Canada. The opening bridge collapse was filmed both on a set, but also on the Lionsgate Bridge in Vancouver. No relation. This was still in the midst of the 3D movie trend, so this would also be filmed in that format. But this would also end up being the first Final Destination released on IMAX. Taking the opening credits from the prior sequel, where we see the X-rayed versions of various deaths in the franchise, they've kept a similar look but grounded it a bit. Shot in camera, we get various objects flying through glass at the screen, and it makes for some very cool visuals. And YouTube is getting more and more stingy with the violence, even though it's very clearly fake and from a movie, so I can't show you damn near anything here and I apologize. But let's get into it. The suspension bridge features a ton of visual effects and provides some really great tension building. It's interesting to see just how many elements in this sequence were CGI, because there are some that you might not expect. It's also the longest opening accident of the entire franchise. And shout out to Emma Bell, who had to scream her heart out during the scene, even when she's not a main feature in it. Maybe it's just because my stepmom is a gymnastics coach, so I've been around the sport for a long time, but nothing gets to me more than the gymnastics death. This girl has been set up as an absolute sweetheart, and they do a wonderful job of teasing all of the different things that could easily kill her. This scene is a great example of Quayle's great eye.
Especially the hands, because it's like gripping the hands or being on the bar when she goes from one bar to the other. So anticipate it. So you're on this bar, and then her hands come into it, and that's a cutting point.
Many of the deaths in the film are based on real incidents. Isaac's death was based on someone who was getting acupuncture who fell off the table and one of the needles punctured their heart. Obviously, they go a bit further in the movie, but it's a moment that everyone can wince at. We just won't touch on the rather racist dialogue during the massage.
Okay, I'm sorry. Do you come with subtitles?
Whoops. But this scene almost ended much differently, with the original intention that Isaac gets engulfed in flames after standing in a puddle of alcohol. Thank God for Buddha's inclusion. Olivia's scene was also altered slightly. While just one of her eyes is burned in the film, an alternate scene shows both of her eyes being burnt up. One visual trick that they used repeatedly was filming the real-life human in one shot with a dummy filled with all sorts of blood and gore in another take. They would combine the two shots and get some ooey gooey results. There are also some pretty fun moments here, like Olivia knocking a picture off her desk that was taken at the Devil's Flight roller coaster, you know, the one from part 3. Then there's Roy standing next to this race car, which just so happens to be the same car that crashed in The Final Destination. We've also even got the log truck from Final Destination 2 making an appearance. Heck, even the restaurant that Sam works at is the same one seen at the end of the first film. There's so many connections here. And spoilers for this decade-plus-old movie, but the aspect that really stuns is when it's revealed that the events we've seen actually take place before the infamous Flight 180. This is a prequel. But it's unfortunate for our two leads because the entire audience knows what's going to be happening to them in no time flat. But it's a great way to show that death never stops. And even the first film wasn't the beginning of this kind of thing happening. And it's also really cool to see the Flight 180 crash from a different angle. And it's great that we don't just have characters looking up these past incidents and immediately knowing what's happening. While sure it cuts down on exposition in the other films, it would have been very tired to do it again. So the change seems to work. One of the absolute best elements of Final Destination 5 is its mythology on how to defeat death. In past films, we've seen that new life can help, but for the most part, death comes to these folks no matter what they do. But this film introduces the concept of murdering someone else to take your place. It gives us what the Final Destination series has always been lacking, a human villain. Sure, they use Ian McKinley in a similar role in the third one, but he mostly taunts versus actually trying to kill someone. Here, Peter is an absolute maniac, having lost his girlfriend and obsessing over death coming for them. He even almost pushes a woman into traffic. He sees Sam and Molly's relationship and doesn't understand why they're deserving of happiness over him. It's easy to see where Peter is coming from, even if he takes some rather excessive means to do so. And I also love that the movie doesn't even confirm that this technique works, as everyone in the film ends up dead, even those who seemingly took another's life. Brian Tyler returned to score the film, and while Shirley Walker's style is certainly missed, I absolutely loved her. Tyler manages to bring a great deal of tension and suspense. The franchise continues its usage of on-the-nose music and suspenseful moments. We've got Dust in the Wind playing during the bridge sequence, and it's so perfect. Final Destination 5 released in the United States on August 12, 2011, and brought in $18.4 million on its opening weekend. The movie would end its worldwide run at $157.6 million. But with just $42 million of that being earned domestically, This was officially the lowest grossing entry of the franchise, but it was well liked, earning a B+ audience rating and cinema score, with the critical consensus on Rotten Tomatoes being that it's still only for the gore-thirsty faithful, but Final Destination 5 represents a surprising return to form for the franchise. For the movie's promotion, Miles Fisher released a music video called New Romance, which featured the cast of FD5 recreating Saved by the Bell, only with a twist. It's a fun video, and I highly recommend you checking it out. Another bit of promotion that ended up causing a stir for the studio was the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK, who banned the original poster as it was likely to cause fear and undue stress in children. Excuse me, what? Warner Brothers countered, but the ASA stood their ground. What say you? Is this poster too traumatizing for children to see? Unfortunately, despite a positive response and an impressive international box office, we're still waiting on a 6th installment. Tony Todd had even been hopeful of them filming 6 and 7 back-to-back, but as the years went on, this plan disappeared. In 2019, Saw sequel writers Patrick Melton and Marcus Dunstan were hired to write a reimagining. But yet again, that never happened. But with Spider-Man No Way Home director John Watts boarding as a producer, and directors Zach Lipovsky and Adam B. Stein on board, it finally appears to be on the fast track. Let's just hope that they continue to go hard with the violence, while expanding upon the mythology in an interesting way. I guess only time will tell.
Oh my god, that's so awesome!